So tell me about this project.
Yes. So the project is to interview a different person every day to the end of 2024. And I chose the end of 2024 because in 2024, NASA is planning to land people on the moon again.
Right.
And basically, my motivation for the project is multifold. I actually work from home, and I could go for days just staying at home. And I started the project in December before coronavirus was a thing, as a way to get me out of the house to meet people in person because I was going to do all the interviews in person. But like everybody else, our plans for 2020 have been altered. So
yeah, to say the least.
But I thought it'd be a good way to sort of document the range of people's interests, understanding, and thoughts about humanity in space, and about their concept on kind of how that fits into their world. So that's
cool.
The project.
That's a lot of interviews.
1,840.
What number are you on now?
Well, I'm counting backwards. So I think this would be 1,673. I have to go look at the website to be sure. So just have to do the math there. Yeah, so I think it's close to like, this is 1,672 actually. So I think about 170 or so.
Yeah, cool. Where are you finding all these people?
So, I mean, before coronavirus, I would go up to people at Starbucks and in the mall and on the street and at the airports. So I have some interesting videos there. But now I'm reaching out to people on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter. I tried this random chat service, Omegle, for a couple of times. So that was a disaster. But that's pretty much it. My cousin Catherine, she's hooked me up with like 25 people in a matter of a couple of days. So,
where are you at?
Houston, Texas.
Oh, cool. I'm in Austin.
Oh, okay. Just really close by. Firefly Aerospace is based up there.
I've never heard of them.
Yeah, they're a small satellite launcher, and they've also been selected to land payloads on the moon for NASA over the next 10 years. So that they're one of 15 companies that have been selected for that. So Mike, tell me a little bit about yourself and what do you do?
Well, I met Catherine, your cousin, when I was working in environmental politics here in Austin. And I don't remember what we were working on. I think the first time I met her, we were working on this big bond campaign to preserve land over the Aquifer. And at least it was around that time. And so after I got out of graduate school, I left graduate school. I wasn't happy there. And I got involved in environmental politics in Austin and then formed a company called Grassroots Solutions. And we would work on a variety of candidates and bond elections and things like that. And then, but I always wanted to do film. And so after, about 10 years or so ago, I guess I started transitioning to do more film production and have now made a couple feature films and I'm working on a new one that happens to be revolve around the summer of 1969 when people landed on the moon. It's set in Houston, Texas. But very much takes you back to that particular time. Not how that, like the moon landing has two aspects to it. One is that, these people were able to go there and return successfully. But then also that we had the technology that everyone was able to participate through television and through cameras that were on the moon. So those two things sort of made it a worldwide event. And, even the astronauts have talked about how they, when they came home and they would tour around the world, people would not say you did it, they would say we did it. And because it felt like this sort of community. So the film sort of flips the script, so it's people and
That's awesome. In fact, that kind of ties into one way I sort of talk about this project is imagine you're somebody like yourself 50 years in the future from now, like say 2070 or so, and you're looking back on our return to the moon in 2024. I kind of see this as being a time capsule of a variety of opinions of, you know, the common everyday perspective at this time.
Yeah, you broke up there on there a little bit, but you were mentioning looking back from 2070 to this time now.
Oh, exactly. And that this would be a time capsule, a resource for somebody like you in the future to come back and create
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. The CBS, we've used a lot of the CBS archives. That was, they, over the 5 days that they, of the mission, and then starting the night before and on to the morning after, they had almost, you know, wall-to-wall coverage. We're used to that now, but at the time it was a tremendous amount of coverage. So they went all over the world. They had people were interviewed in Trafalgar Square, people were interviewed at a soul festival in Harlem, all to get their reactions to the moon landing and their experience of it. And it's really fascinating because now we just see, you know, the highlights of, you know, Walter Cronkite or whatever. We don't see all this. It was like, I think about 30 hours of coverage. And, you know, Kurt Vonnegut was on there talking Moonland in the studio, Gloria Steinem. It was a wide range of different people that, and got their perspectives at that moment in time. So it's really interesting. So yeah, this will be a similar thing.
And, you know, you mentioned back in 1969, there were 3 network televisions. Pretty much there may have been 1 or 2 major newspapers per city. There was only a handful of periodicals. You know, there was only a few radio stations, and pretty much everybody was watching sort of the same news. And so whenever we landed on the moon, it was a big deal, but it was also streamed in like at the common space. But now where everybody gets their own personalized curated news feeds, I think it's very likely, like I've talked to people, I said, did you know that we're going back to the moon in 2024? I've had ranges from yes, I've known that, all the way to why is NASA keeping it a secret? And I think a lot of it has to do with just the way that news is consumed today. And I think we could very likely go back to the moon and large swaths of the population would have no clue. And I was wondering what your thoughts were.
Yeah, I think SpaceX, NASA, there's so ways to do that. You know, news channels were showing it. The first launch, I tuned into a YouTube thing because I was on my computer, and it turned out to be the SpaceX coverage. But then you could also, I found out later, go over and watch the NASA coverage. And so I chose to do that because, you know, the SpaceX thing was a little more promotional of, like, you know, Tesla and all these different things. But you know, if you look, even though that was a pretty big deal, of course, a lot of other things going on right now that are distracting people. You know, the amount of people who actually watched that was probably minuscule, even though it was the first space launch on American soil in nearly 10 years. So I do think that when, you know, the landing happens, it's like we don't even have a way of knowing anymore. You know, like if you're on Instagram, all day. Maybe one of your friends posted about it. I don't know. So I do think that it's much more fractured. And in some ways, more choices is good, but in other ways, it's, automatically by its very nature, somewhat divisive.
Yeah, it's self-reinforcing. It basically makes you see the world more as you already see it.
Yeah. Well, and I do think that it was interesting just the way that people also spoke on television. It was very sort of high-minded. There's references to Shakespeare and poetry and all these different things about how, this journey of man and, eons and whatever. And it was just all sort of highfalutin, we would consider it today, where the news is much more and people were speaking that there was obvious partisan divide in the coverage in 1969. LBJ was on the coverage. Nixon, of course, was on there. Spiro Agnew was the Republican vice president, was on there. But there was a cultural divide in that they would talk about the sort of young people of today and sort of it was almost like the squares versus the hippies more than some Republican and Democratic thing. And because there was a lot of people who thought, why are we spending all this money going to space when we have poverty and we have all these problems, we have hunger and stuff. And so and they even called it a triumph of the squares when it happened. And so the coverage and the way that it was spoke about really shows you what culture was like in the time and where the sort of dividing lines were very, very different than today.
Yeah, one thing that kind of struck me about what was going on with the launch last weekend versus what was happening in Minneapolis and other places was it actually seemed to reinforce some of the perceptions about race relations and what have you. I mean, if you look at, you have all white men pretty much involved in like the launch, talking about the launch and everything. There was just a few people that then fall into that category, and they didn't really play as major of a role in that event. So in some ways, it's like, this is something to bring all of us together, but it didn't feel like it was a reflection of all of us in the event as well. I was wondering what your thoughts were on that.
Yeah, that's always been the case. It was certainly the case in 1969. We even threw some stuff in the coverage. I'm blanking on his name. Ira Magaziner. He later worked for Clinton administration, but he was at the time sort of a young radical. He was on there with Gloria Steinem, and he talked about how few blacks there were in NASA in the neighborhood, and that in Huntsville, Alabama, I think, where they were building the rockets and everything, that they put that facility in a mostly black neighborhood, but most of the workers were white. And I went to school at Clear Lake High School, which is where NASA is, and it was overwhelmingly white. I mean, we had very few. Each class, the entire high school class, like say my senior class, had maybe less than 10 African Americans, I would say, out of 750 kids, something like that. I played basketball, so I knew it's a stereotypical thing, but I knew, half of at least the guys and some of the girls, because some of them were on the basketball team, but it was overwhelmingly white. And part of that reason is one of the major employers there was NASA, but then also, Boeing was there and all of these other contractors. And so it was very, very engineer heavy area and not diverse at all.
I think a lot of this is sort of like kind of a compounding thing. I mean, you have access to the opportunities early on, but you also have sort of this perception of what can you become And a lot of
Mhm.
people take that second part based upon what they see. So it's like a chicken and egg type of situation. If you had a lot more successful um, non-white, non-male aerospace engineers, that would inspire a lot of other people to kind of see themselves as becoming aerospace engineers or astronauts or what have you. But it's almost, how do you, kind of bootstrap that
Yeah.
process?
Yeah, if you look at any sort of profession, I mean, look how many kids become what their father is or whatever. I mean, it's always amazing to me, for instance, how many, sports stars, their father, played football and now they're a basketball player. It shows you like, oh, I can that goes with just about in the world. I mean, who need to or learn to become an aerospace engineer? If no one's around to sort of model that for you. And one, do you even know what that is and that it exists? And what's the
Yeah, that's right. I mean, you have to first know that it exists. You have to then envision yourself as successfully becoming that. And then third of all, you need the path. And then fourth of all, you need to be able to go through the path. So it's like all these pieces have to come together.
yeah. Now, I did notice on the coverage, they had an African American astronaut was on the NASA coverage of it,
Yes.
and sort of a commentator, and then a woman. And I do notice a lot more female support.
Well, and
NASA workers. Obviously, in the Apollo era, there was no women.
even SpaceX in their coverage as well, they had a female providing commentary too.
Yeah.
But I just thought oh kind of Glenn Shotwell, the president of SpaceX. She's an aerospace engineer, and she says she was really motivated to become an aerospace engineer because she had seen another female aerospace engineer, and she talks about how it was like elementary school or something, and she was just amazed by how good the person looked, and it's like, wow, I want to be that person. So it's kind of interesting how people latch on to certain aspects early on in life, and that kind of motivates them to take that next step. That takes that next step.
That's interesting. Yeah.
So I guess first of all, did you know that NASA was planning to go off to the moon in 2024?
I did because I follow news, even if it's small items in the paper, I still read a newspaper. And so I've been aware of the sort of the debates about it. And I follow Buzz Aldrin on social media, who, has this whole thing about going to Mars. And so, he posts or someone posts on his behalf various, space related items and news items. So I was aware of that. And you know, I think there's generally a misunderstanding about going, quote, back to the moon. I don't think most people in the public know that every time we went to the moon, we went to different portions of it. It would be like landing in San Saba, Texas, and thinking you had seen all of Texas. I mean, we were extremely limited in our ability at that time, especially on the first couple of missions, to move around much at all. It wasn't until later they had the rover that they could stretch any distance. And so we've barely touched on the exploration of the moon itself, even with those number of missions. So every time we go back, it's different. But also the idea that it will be a launching pad of some sort that we can use it to, take further steps in space.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we didn't do anything at the poles, is all the equatorial regions. And, now we're learning that there's water ice trapped in the poles, yeah, potentially a really good resource for us. And then there's like the lava tubes, and there's even been some speculation that the lava tubes themselves may have some ice trapped in them too. So then all the meteors and everything. There's like so much to explore. But do you make mention of that in your film? NASA's plans to go back.
I don't think that we do, and I don't think I don't know that the public was. I mean, I don't know how much even in the coverage they talked about it. They did talk about it some, I guess, that this would be the first of many, but it was such a momentous thing that it was the first that I think people were just really singularly focused on them getting there and getting back, rather than what was going to happen next. And I know that, even interest in the public really waned after Apollo 11. They even portray that in the movie Apollo 13, where people aren't really paying much attention that it's happening until something goes wrong. And then everyone was paying attention. So.
And so, I mean, you have kind of a unique perspective of different from anybody else that I remember talking to, where you're an environmentalist and you're a space advocate and you're a historian. So a kind of sociologist type of person as well. So I think, so what do you think about us going back to the moon in 2024? Do you think that's a good thing, or like how does it fit in with your sense of priorities and view of the world?
Well, I think like you mentioned before, that with the turmoil that's going on right now, I think that it may impact public support. I think that, there was this weird juxtaposition of happening, people's ability to news cover the virus anymore. And just days ago, that was all the news was about. And so I do think there's the political will always needs to be there. As the Apollo was supposed to have more missions, and it did not because there wasn't political will for it. So I just hope that things are in motion enough that they will continue no matter what. I think that because of all the problems that were happening at the same time.
It's difficult. I mean, if you look back at 1969, I mean, then we have a lot of unrest because of like the civil rights campaign, and then the war in Vietnam, and we also had economic issues as well. In some ways, it almost seems like then was just as turbulent as the time as it is now. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, there's no question that I think that you had assassinations that were happening, and a lot of violence in the streets, more than we're seeing today. I mean, we think this is unusual, but in the late 1960s, you had far worse riots, and you had major political figures being assassinated, and I do think it felt like the wheels were coming off society. And so having people be able to focus on the space program, and in our film, it's a young kid is the main character, and so he's not aware of all that other stuff. He's like thinking about the future and thinking about how cool this is and all this, because you're a kid, so that's what you sort of choose your focus. He's fascinated by this, and so I think it was this sort of moment where people could kind of come together around the same thing. But like we were talking about earlier, I don't know if you can replicate that again, and because we've done it before in 2024, going back to the moon, I think it will be exciting. I think people will be excited about it, but it won't be that, big shining moment where the whole world is coming together with, holding their breath together, No,
I think coronavirus is that has been most successful, and probably be the most successful bringing the world together event that we could have.
Yes, yeah. So I do think it will be much different, and it won't be as big of a deal. And if we're able to go to, eventually go to Mars or some other place, and that will be maybe an exciting moment for the whole world if we get that far.
And the idea of priorities and opportunity costs is something that I expected to hear a lot of when doing these interviews. And it's been kind of interesting that the people who talk about opportunity costs seem to be fairly well off. And some of the people who are like, yeah, we should go to the moon, they seem, maybe not as well off. So that was kind of surprising to see that. But the other kind of like reason not to go to the moon or not to go and explore space kind of caught me off guard. And I thought you might have a unique perspective on this. And it basically be summed up as we've messed up the Earth. Why should we mess up the moon too?
Well, it's kind of funny you say that, because we have really messed up the moon, and we've left a bunch of junk there, and it got worse as time went on because of all the stuff we were bringing up there. I have a friend, she has gone to Antarctica to work on some of the original stuff there that was left there by explorers. And so it was always her dream to be able to go to the moon to preserve like the Apollo 11 stuff that's there. And so there is some and satellite thing, issue of too much space junk. And that movie Gravity did a good job of just exploring one way that might go awry. But and we go to other places. I think we slammed something into the side of the moon at one point to try to test if there was water there, and it's like, as one of my friends said, oh, now we just messed it up. It's like if there's any water there, it ought to be radiated or something. So I get that point. And I think in the 60s, they expected things to move very fast. I mean, Arthur C. Clarke was on there, and he's talking about how we would have colonies on the moon by the end of the century. And he really believed it. He meant it. And it just felt like we had progressed so fast in space that would just continue, and that those things would happen, and we would have like colonies. And that there would be certain advantages they even talked about of being it, because if you were older, like gravity was less. And, could that be beneficial in some way? And so there was all this idea that was on a course. And of course, people watched Star Trek and they saw all these different things, and they just thought that was inevitable. And now, we're rarely getting out of orbit ever, because we're sending, like mechanized things to Mars and stuff, and that's pretty cool. But as far as human space flight, there hasn't been much of it.
And when you look at the future of humanity, you talked about Arthur C. Clarke thinking there would be kind of colonies on the moon by the end of the century and things like that. But whenever you look out, say like 500 years, do you think those types of things have become real, or do you see us as still kind of trapped on Earth making little bitty weekend trips to these places?
I'm probably the latter. Just haven't seen the last 50 years that we haven't really done much in that realm. I would guess that that we would probably be limited in 500 years. I mean, maybe things will change. Who knows? Maybe it's the Chinese who end up really getting into space or something. We can't always assume that's going to be the United States. And I do think that, maybe other reason we will do it. I'm not sure, but I tend to right now, that we just keep circling and making a lot of the same mistakes over and over again. So I'm not sure about that.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned the Chinese. Are you familiar with the TV show The Expanse?
No.
So it's it's kind of set in a futuristic world where we've actually expanded out into the solar system, and you have some socioeconomic divisions between the different settlers from different places. But one of the key underlying foundational assumptions of the movie is that there are three groups of people that make it out in colonized space: the Chinese, the Indians, and the Texans.
That's hilarious.
Yeah.
This is like where is the show? What platform is the show on?
It's on Amazon. It's an Amazon original series.
I'll have to check this out.
The first three seasons were done by, I think, the Sci-Fi Channel, and then they dropped it and Amazon picked it up. So
cool.
The other environmental aspect of space is also what we're doing to Earth in terms of the launching. I mean, the Starship that Elon's building in Boca Chica, Texas, is going to burn, millions and millions of gallons of liquid methane with each launch. And they talk about, trying to use some type of carbon capture to react with hydrogen to create the methane at some point. You kind of see maybe being carbon neutral. And, they're also kind of counting the displacement of petrochemicals from Tesla as well. But what are your thoughts about protecting the environment on Earth as we try to reach into space? I mean, what kind of issues are you aware of?
Well, the most encouraging thing, I think, is the reuse of the rockets. It's obviously a huge thing for the economy of space to be able to do that. And so I would hope that you could figure out different propulsion ways to use. There's a lot of different ways to generate power that can be far more environmentally friendly. And so it's somewhat encouraging that, the same people behind Tesla are doing this. I mean, you can't really build anything or create any level of power, some solution. Proponents of things often use these arguments to confuse people, There is a downside of solar power. There's a downside of wind power. I mean, you have to build giant turbines. I mean, that has a pollution impact, right? I mean, the stuff that's inside of a solar panel, is toxic. So nothing's completely clean. But it's all in the scale of it, it is, the amount of fuel that's used to do one of these launches is obviously has an environmental detriment. Much, much better for us to figure out a different way for that launch, because as you know, once you get into space, you don't need a whole lot of power. And I know there's been years of studies of different ways to use solar power while you're in space. And so it's all about getting out of orbit, right? And so I'm sure that in the future there could be far more efficient and more environmentally friendly ways to do that.
And let's see, so Elon Musk, his goal is to put a 1 million person city on Mars. And that's sort of like the whole focus that he has in terms of building the Starship. It's going to be 100% reusable. The factory that they're building in Boca Chica will be able to make 2 of these per week. So he thinks he'll be able to lift hundreds of people, megatons of material into orbit when he gets fully up and running. Jeff Bezos, are you familiar with his space company?
I am, yeah.
And he has a Blue
Origin.
Origin. Yeah. And he has a completely different vision. His vision is, Earth is the best place in the solar system. We should make use of space resources to protect the Earth and take all those Earth-harming activities and move them into space. Like, for example, the power generation. Why couldn't you mine the moon for those materials you need for solar panels, build solar panels, put them in orbit around the Earth, and then beam the energy back down? Then you don't have to actually generate the electricity on the Earth. I was wondering what you thought about about that vision, if that is something that excited you or resonated with you.
I was unaware of that. I always thought of that, of his company, as more like space tourism, for wealthy people who could afford to go. So I wasn't aware of this more utilitarian aspect of his company. I know he had the various things. He had like the lens system, and he was working up to the Armstrong system. I'm aware of that. It also, one thing too is like, I was nervous watching the launch the other day because it is dangerous, and had just gone to college and left when the exploded. And my parents had been to the launch before, the very previous launch of the shuttle, because we had a neighbor who was on it. And so I was aware of how all the people who are closest to those astronauts are sitting in the stands watching it all and together, and nothing had gone wrong for so long that they weren't really prepared for it, and especially like the psychological impact. And we were sending the shuttle up so often, and I did have my friends' parents would be on there and stuff. And so I had to run around to try to figure out who was on there and whether I knew them. I think I was a freshman in college at the time. A woman at the egg roll stand had it on the little TV she had in her egg roll stand, and student had told me that the shuttle exploded. And I remember the other explosion in like the early 2000s, and so it's dangerous, and so I think we've also got to get over that aspect of it. If you had a major accident, what would that do to the program? What would that do if we're actually sending quote real people up there and not trained astronauts if some disaster happened?
Well, and
so go ahead.
You even see, commercial airline crashes still today, but people still perceive the airline as being safe enough to travel in. I think it all depends upon volume. You need to have enough of it successful that the failures look to be kind of like one-offs.
Right. Yes, I agree with that. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. If it happened early, like on the first launch and included a bunch of people, and public perception. The reason people fear sharks, being attacked by sharks, that happens so rarely. But I was at a beach several years ago where there was a series of shark attacks not that far away, and trust me, everyone was terrified, even though there's so many people in the water. So I think there's something about even if something's unlikely, is it exotic? Is it like a weird way to die? And so I think you're right. Once space travel stopped being exotic, then people would accept some failures in the system.
Yeah, I mean, and if we really do start expanding out into the solar system, I mean, you're going to have micrometeor impacts that cause depressurization. You're going to have radiation events that have health effects. Just look at the colonization of North America by the Europeans. How many bodies were on, did that require?
Right, yeah.
Well, if it was safe and affordable, would you personally have an interest in going into space?
Probably not. I mean, I think right now I'm really down on air travel. So I think I would let those more interested go. I think I would be interested in seeing it develop, but I don't know how much there would be to see and experience, but maybe.
And what was the name of the documentary you created?
Well, this is a feature feature working on half will be coming out next year. And it's been in the news some, but we haven't made the official announcement of what distributor. About a documentary, documentary, and then I made another one about that used movies filmed in Austin to sort of see the culture and the community through the cinema lens, and it's called Also Starring Austin.
And you broke up there for most of the first part of that. I got the Also Starring Austin
Yes.
part, but what was before that? You said it's a feature film, not a documentary.
Yes, Starring Austin was a feature film as well, and then a documentary, and then another one about controversial 1970s baseball player Doc Ellis, famous because he claimed he threw a no-hitter while he was high on LSD, and it's called No, a documentary, documentary. It's currently on Amazon Prime and a bunch of for rent. Was on Netflix before that, and then the new one is called Apollo 10 and a half, and it's directed by Richard Linklater. And it is a narrative film that includes many documentary elements because of all the news coverage and other things that are featured in the film.
And Apollo 10 and a half, is that out right now?
No, it'll be coming out next year.
Next year, okay.
Yeah, we'll have an announcement. We're doing an announcement in July about all the details of it. It's being edited right now.
And I have a lot of clips from these interviews that I was thinking about putting together in some summary. I was wondering if you had any recommendation on video editing software.
I don't. You know, I think for film editing, Avid is the most popular among professional editors. But I think Adobe Premiere may be easier to use. And then, you know, there's a variety of, I mean, even like, you know, QuickTime has some editing capabilities. There's some pretty simplistic ways to do it as well within most video programs. If you don't want to go into the, you know, because you're not going to have to be editing different types of material together, so it should be pretty.
I'll have to check some of those out. I guess the key part for me would be find a good friend that uses one of these programs to help guide me along. So maybe that should guide my decision.
Yeah. Yes. Who do you know and what do they use? Yeah. But Adobe Premiere comes with a suite of things like Photoshop and all that kind of stuff. So a lot of people use it. A lot of schools use it because it connects with all those other programs as well.
And so I really appreciate your time, Mike. The connection between us has been really bad. So, you know, I think we got about 80% of everything that we've said. So it's going to be kind of an interesting thing. But I was wondering if you had any additional comments in closing.
No, I think it's great that there's been a renewed interest in space. You know, they've had huge amounts of applicants for recent astronaut classes. They've been setting records. Even when like the Mars rover landed, I went to this crazy like rave like party about it. I think that there is, it just feels like there's a new surge of interest in it all. And you have these private companies coming along. So it's kind of an exciting time again. Well, it hasn't been in a very long time for space.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Mike. I really appreciate your time.
You got it. Thanks. It was great to meet you too.
It's good to meet you. I look forward to seeing Apollo 10 and a half.
Great. Okay. I think you'll love it. All right.
Okay. Bye-bye.